Okay. So this is approximately where we left off. If I was looking at and actually heard myself correctly from last Thursday, we just finished talking about kind of the efficacy of abstinence when it comes to relapse rates and relapse prevention. Okay. Um, Now what I want to talk about is we've been talking about cognitive behavioral approaches this quite a bit this semester, and I keep mentioning them. I kind of went over them at the beginning of the semester, but relapse prevention is a good place to kind of give everybody a good grounding of what it is when we're doing relapse prevention. So I'm going to give you two models, this one, and then we'll go through this kind of what we do in the therapy session. Okay. So when we look at relapse prevention, we look at high risk situations that puts a person at risk of having cravings and triggers to um, the potential of having a relapse when dealing with addiction. Okay. And then we have kind of two routes. Okay. If if we've learned if you look at this top round, let me kind of try and figure out how I want to explain this. If you look at this one right here, this is the healthy coping strategies and the cognitive strategies, which we'll get to here in a minute. So having good coping responses to a trigger, into cravings, and self-efficacy, where just to kind of give definition to self-efficacy in this context, it's the belief you can accomplish something. So my simplest example is I make a pretty mean eggs over easy. So I have a high level of self-efficacy that if you ask me to make eggs over easy, I would do it just fine. Okay. That's, I know it sounds like a silly example, but that's basically what self-efficacy is. Okay. What's an example of the opposite? With our computer era, and given that as a professor, I'm doing everything pretty much on a computer now instead of a whiteboard, I have very low self-efficacy in my writing ability. Sure, typing's fine, but if we went back to the days of chalkboards and dry erase boards, I'd probably have to retrain myself. That's low self-efficacy. When we're talking about it in the addiction area, it's the self-efficacy that you can overcome this situation, this craving and this trigger. Okay. If we were to put this in the guise of, say, for example, trauma situations, usually you have a trauma trigger. And then if you don't have good coping skills to kind of deal with that trigger, um, you have a trauma response, or because you don't feel like you can handle that situation. So you go through the trauma area. Okay. But if we have good self-efficacy and good coping skills, this reduces the probability, decreases the probability of a relapse. Now, the point I do want to make at this point, because as um, social services experts, as group facilitators, this field is can be highly frustrating at times because the ability to sustain these kinds of things is very difficult for clients. Okay. And and that's why we can only say it decreases the probability, because human beings, as you all know, are not perfect. We find ourselves in novel, stressing situations that can lead us to a relapse. For example, even if we have some good coping skills and a good belief system, if we're put in a novel, stressful situation, those skills may not be as effective. Okay. And it's important to discuss that with your group members, especially when they get really, uh, um, probably one of the saddest relapse things that I went through with a client is this individual had such high self-efficacy that he wasn't going to relapse. And he was committed. He was doing all, for example, AA groups, individual counseling. He was about 6 months in when I met him, and we went through some relapse strategy, and I followed him for another year. So we're talking he hadn't had a relapse for over 2 years. Okay. But then something novel happened is that when he was going through the relapse prevention process, he wasn't in a relationship. He was so fixed and interested in overcoming his addiction that that's what he focused on for 2 years straight. And then he found this new novel person that, yes, brings excitement and thrill, but also brings stress. And he then started to go through the relapse process. Okay. So I bring this up because you can have someone with a lot of self-efficacy, but we always have to remind ourselves and remind our clients that we got to look out for those novel, stressful situations that we haven't practiced coping skills in. Okay. Okay, I'll get off the soapbox on that one. I think I'm going off on a tangent. I apologize. So let's go down now the ineffective um, situation. So if we haven't instilled good behavioral and cognitive coping skills, when we have a craving and we're not able to alleviate that craving without relapsing, we go through a decrease of self-efficacy, where in this case, what we do is a self-justification, or what you do, what the technical term is reducing cognitive dissonance. Okay. Cognitive dissonance is a conflict between two attitudes, between a behavior and a belief. And when you have decreased self-efficacy, you're more likely to come up with self-justifications to relieve that cognitive dissonance. So we say things like, oh, I'm not going to have the negative things happen this time. I can bring this up with couples situations. When working with couples, they would often go through the relapse process going, we're not going to get angry with each other. The police are not going to show up. We're going to be fine. We haven't used for 45 days, and I feel like we become stronger. And so we can do it this time. So you hear that self-justification, right?
Tyler, Swift with the wrench. I welcome you to your new.
Okay. So then this leads to a lapse. Okay. And this is what we call the initial use of a substance. In a lot of the literature, there's a lapse, and then there's a full-blown relapse. Okay. A lapse is when, let's say you go have a few drinks. Okay. But you do it and it just wasn't as enjoyable. You didn't get the effects you expected, and the like, and you're like, I just don't want to have that. So that probably will decrease the probability that you'll have a complete relapse. Okay. But normally what happens is that you again have that um, cognitive dissonance about the violation of your abstinence. Okay. And so you go through this self-deprecating process saying, well, I'm just going to have to accept this addiction. And you try to redefine the effects of the substance. Okay. And then this, of course, increases your probability of a relapse. Okay. So this is the process that is commonly used when using a cognitive behavioral method. But these are the things that you do in the group. Okay. Is you look at each of those areas that can lead to a lapse and a relapse. And you think, how can we put coping skills and intervention at each one of these steps? And this is probably what makes cognitive behavioral therapy a kind of one of the gold standards, is that with it, you just don't give one solid, you need to change this. No, we take the time in the process and say, here's what we do when we're in a high risk situation. Here's what we do when we are having coping skill issues and whatnot. So what do we often do? So in the group setting, we have what's called self-monitoring. A lot of times we use journals for this, where a person has a craving and they write down their thoughts and their feelings. And we also have them create what's called an inventory of drug taking situations. So they become aware of the situations that they get themselves into that then will start affecting their use. And then we might have some measures, and CBT is really into measuring this as drug taking confidence questionnaire. So how confident are you right now to say, I'm not going to use? If you're at this initial area and it's a high confident that you're not going to use, then in the counseling process, the group process, you got to kind of think as the facilitator and go, okay, this individual has been an addict for 24 years. I'm exaggerating, for 24 years, and has high confidence that he or she will be able to stop right away. Okay. That's when you have to start using those challenging techniques that we've learned about and those confrontational techniques to kind of say, okay, let's explore this better. Okay. On another level, we have them description of past relapse fantasies. I think I mentioned probably very poorly last week how, again, it goes back to the journaling where a person has a craving and you have them stop and you have them write down the situation they're in, the time of day, and what's their first thoughts that they're having. Okay. And normally what you'll find is it's this relapse fantasies they're going through. They're thinking about the good old days of getting high or getting drunk, and they forget about the negative consequences that it's had. Okay. So now that we understand, so this is all about understanding high risk situations, and the coping skill comes into play is on this reframing the fantasy of use. This is the cognitive part. The behavioral part is the self-monitoring. Am I putting myself at risk? And the description, the behavioral description of a relapse, so that you can put intervention tools in. So when you have a fantasy, when you have a craving, you can say, okay, this is what happened last time I had relapses and whatnot. So I need to change my situation. Okay. And then at the second level, now that we can identify when we're in a high risk situation and moment, then we want to do some coping skills training, how to deal with behaviorally with that trigger. What do I need to do? Should I call someone? Should I avoid something? What should I do? Okay. So this is the behavioral part. What skills should I put in place to make it so I behaviorally don't go on with that situation? On the test level, we usually do what's called a situational competency test. This is a test to see how competently a person can navigate certain situations. So you put them through a situation interacting with a coworker and then at home and see if they have the right coping skills to deal with the different stressors in their life. Okay. And then also on the behavioral part, we talk about things like meditation, relaxation training, stress management to help them physiologically calm down. Okay. And on the cognitive level, remember we talked about self-efficacy. We have them do things, imagining things that what happens if I choose not to use. So you have them picture themselves at a beach or something like that. This is where in a lot of relapse prevention, they do the collages of where you want to be in 5 years, those kinds of things. Okay. Now you'll notice that these hit on both so far. Okay, because our goal here is to increase self-efficacy, but also increase coping. Okay. Um, and so let's go down here. So the next level on a cognitive level is what we call the education about immediate and delayed effects. Okay. About what the immediate effects of drug use is, but then what are those negative delayed effects? And what does that mean? Okay. And this is often explained to alcoholics in that a lot of alcoholics believe that alcohol starts having a positive effect right away. So, but this is what we call a placebo effect because it actually takes alcohol about 30 minutes to actually start making the physiological changes that lead to feelings of drunkenness and the like. So we talk about this, you're having an immediate reaction to, for example, this alcohol, but really it's not there for about, and so we challenge those ideas, right? And then we help have them develop a decision matrix. Okay. If I do go have a drink, what do I do next on one level? So on the lapse level, the decision matrix is, what do I do? Maybe I go back, maybe I go to an AA meeting or call a sponsor or go see the group next week or go do some refresher groups with relapse prevention, those kinds of things. And then the other part is contract limited extent of use, reminder cards, those kind of visual cues you can put places. And I notice I'm taking quite a bit of time on this. And then we get to abstinence violation effect. And this comes to cognitive restructuring, that lapses is a mistake of coping. It's not a moral deficit of the person. And this is important with the relapse prevention technique, is it's a skill that isn't learned, but this does not make you a bad person or a failure. It's because the coping skills that we've put in place don't work for this individual. Okay. So let's real quickly take a look at, again, the effectiveness. Okay. Um, okay. Sorry. When we use skills training as an example, so this one is days of continuous use. Okay. We see that we reduce the mean days of continuous use from a high level, right, to a lower level. So if we have a control group, okay, they tend to use, so the control groups they use for this is people who want to stop using but aren't fully engaged. Okay. Um, their mean days of straight use tend to be 44. Okay. And it tends to, so if you want to think about it this way, though, if we take the 62 it could be anywhere from 22 up to a whopping 106 straight days if we take this standard deviation into account, okay? Whereas this one, if you look, you're at 5.1, right? And the standard deviation is 6.9. So we're at 12 days here, I believe. And we're under on this 0, okay? And this is, so just on the skills training part, we can see that it reduces continuous days of drinking significantly. We don't even get up to the minimum for the control group, okay? Skills training with alcoholics, 1-year follow-up. Again, we look at the control group versus the, and this is the number of drinks consumed. So we see even with the skills training, we're about 2/3 down from the combined control. So we're still doing pretty good. So, but do consider this 507 that were consumed in those 22 days at the max. So, and then the days drunk, we go from 64 on average to about 11. Controlled drinking, and I know this sounds strange because not every addict's goal is to become abstinent. A lot of addicts have the goal to reduce the amount of drinking, to not let it get out of control. And so for what this graph is for individuals who are not looking for abstinence, they're looking for control over their life and control over their drinking habits. And so as you can see, with the combined control, very few are able to control their drinking in the control group, but we get slightly higher when we look at skills training to help people reduce the amount of drinking they do, choose the place and the area, not because of triggers or anything else, to reduce that drinking. Okay. And this is months after treatment. So you can see this graph probably looks familiar. So when we look at the control, we do see a reduction, but we can see that the relapse prevention is much more effective over time. Okay. I'm going to kind of skip some of these. So this is just some points that were made to kind of give the empirical support. It is true that we really haven't found a good treatment to prevent the lapse. Okay, which really means that for a lot of individuals, they will at least go. I like to say experiment. They want to experiment. They want to test themselves in a way. Okay. But it is more effective at the relapse management, meaning how to delay continued relapsing after that initial lapse. Okay. It's particularly effective at maintaining treatment effects over long-term followed up measurements of 1 to 2 years. So it does have some stay power. And it has a delayed emergence effect in which greater improvement coping occurs over time. Okay. And probably what makes this treatment relapse prevention is maybe most effective for more impaired substance abusers, including more severe levels of substance use. And this is kind of an interesting topic, especially when we're looking at the field overall. I did some research on peer support. and whether or not it helped with the symptomologies of individuals who were suffering from addiction and were suffering from a mental illness of some time. So it's what they call a co-occurring disorder. Okay. And in the peer support system, the one that I worked with is that they would send someone who has been in recovery for a long time and provide kind of that almost social services support and management. Okay. And what we found in that research is it was effective for those who had a severe mental illness and drinking problem or substance use problem. But in that research, it actually showed that people with a low to moderate mental illness and substance use, it actually made them worse over time. And the idea is that in some cases, and this is why you need to get to know your individual group members. Because what we found is that in some cases, the person with mild to moderate mental illness felt guilty that their mental illness was not worse because of that peer support system that they get this continuous feedback about that person's experiences compared to them, and therefore they must not be as bad. Okay. I also found this working with survivors of domestic violence and survivors of sexual assault in the group setting. And that's why it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning of the group, is that everyone brings their own individual level, subjective level of trauma and pain. And you got to take it at the individual level and not at the group level. Okay. So using each other as support systems, but not as comparisons and contrasts with each other. I don't need to kind of go in. This is the thing that I do want to mention about relapse prevention as we close up this session, is we have found that the group format is more effective than the individual therapy format. And if you think about why that is one, they don't feel alone. But two, think about all of the coping mechanisms and coping skills that a group of addicts can bring together versus individuals sitting in an individual therapy room. Okay. So that's something to consider when you're looking at working with people with addiction, is keeping in mind these group formats tend to be a bit more effective. Okay, I think all of these things I think you'll pick up in your classes. Okay, we went over that. Went over that. Okay. We went over all that stuff. That's good. All right, I'm going to stop sharing right here.